caught in South Australia, and we've had a pretty dry period for quite a long time now, and we have this situation where we had a very dry spring, we had a poor autumn, and now we're going into winter with quite a deficiency of feed. And what I want to focus in this address is not so much about the technical and production stuff, but about how you as a person handle adversity, because I see when people are under a lot of pressure, a lot of the time they change the sort of decisions they make. And I focus pretty much on the person. To get the person right, then we can get the business right. If you think you're going to get the business right with poor people skills, well, I think you've got another thing coming. And what I want to introduce you to, which I don't think too many people have thought about, is a lot of farmers need to face their hidden addiction. And we'll get to that as we go through the presentation. So in your business, anybody who attended that session over there, what did he tell you was the number one profit driver in a livestock business? Passion. Yeah, what else? Anybody disagree? Got another one? Sorry? Stocking rate? Yep. Yep. You know, there's the biggest profit driver in your business. Can you see it? It's there. So one of the most important things, I'm not like Kevin Rudd who carried a mirror around his back pocket, but you've got to look at yourself in your own mirror. You know, a lot of us were blindsided by our own deficiency a lot of the time, and I think you've got to be checking that out. So some unconsciously refuse to accept what they see and pay the price in not seeing what's reality. Some of us need to go behind the shed and have a darn good bloody talk to ourselves about certain issues, because, you know, as soon as you start to go soft in one area of your business, there's quite often you're going soft in a lot of areas. And make sure anything that you're doing, you're seeing the good in it first, because if you've got this focus on negativity or where you're not performing all that well, you might drown in that. So you get a lot more motivation out of seeing what you're doing well. So it's having a balance in your analysis. So when we had the dry spring, in the higher rainfall country needed 2.5, 3 tonne of dry matter to get through to the next autumn break or thereabouts with some level of sup-feeding. But most of my lifetime ewe, I had 59 different properties in lifetime ewe in the springtime, and most of them only had 1,500 kilos. So we needed a bloody absolute reality check at that point to know that you were a tonne short at that point going into the dry. So if I ask you all to shut your eyes and visualise on an 800 hectare property, it's $160,000 in bought feed, but you can visualise that's that number of silos or that big a hay shed, and it's to acknowledge that right from the word go. I saw a lot of guys who and girls just kept managing as they normally had done, and they're running themselves into a bit of a problem. And we should never base our decisions on hope. We should base them on high probability, and we all know that our outlook for our industry at this present time is quite positive. So when we're managing change, which is what it's all about over time, is we had 30% of the flock 20 years ago were wethers, and they were our pressure relief valve on our farm. Now I go to so many properties where they're wall-to-wall ewes, and lo and behold, they've got a pasture system that supports the ewes, and they don't have the weaner feed system sorted to actually capitalise on the weaner outcome. And I see a lot of cases where I'd say if you have an autumn-born lamb, a terminal, it should be off the property by Christmas, shouldn't be there anymore. And I have blokes ring me up in February and say, I just bring you up to stick it up you because I've sold my lambs for $140, and if I had sold them before Christmas, I would have got 90. But in the process, they've eaten a lot of feed that should have gone down the ewe's throat, so they robbed Peter to pay Paul. And season variability now is so great in lots of areas that we need different strategies. You don't fix new problems with old tools. We need some new tools and management ideas to how to do that. And I think the good managers actually have the trigger points within their business. So if it's at that situation, they pull a trigger and change direction or make an adjustment. So key issues when seasons are tight, I think first and foremost you need to know the two costs. You need to know the cost of feeding the sheep, and as you go into your feeding season, that might be a simple tool like feeding 10 megajoules for 50 days and maybe 5 megajoules for 100 days, and at 2.5 cents a megajoule you already know that you're committed to a certain level of output. And if I said to some people, what have you actually spent on supplementary feed from the time you started to now, they might commit to $15. And I reckon if they did the sums again, or somebody else did them, they might be a little bit higher. Because we always will things to happen. It's like when John McEnroe was a tennis player, if somebody sidelined him, he just willed that ball to go out when he knew he wasn't going to get it, and he turned around and he looked back and he saw the ball was out when it was in. He wished that. So I see a lot of farms where I reckon their dry matter prediction out of the pasture is probably, I deal with people all the time, and I find that all of a sudden when they get under pressure, they're actually seeing 300 kilos more in the paddock than what they would have previously. And then when their condition score in the ewes and they think, oh, I can peel a bit more off her back so that I can save a bit of money, and they say, oh yeah, my ewes are in 3.3, but they're actually 3.1. So they've got this double whammy, and they wonder why their lamb survival then is not as good as what, like Jason was talking about today. So we must be all budgeting our feed in megajoules and costing accordingly. And a lot of the time it is when you're operating a business, it might be so much how high you can fly, but it's how well you bounce. It's how well you get back after a period of time. If you've had to sell breeding stock, if you sell those breeding stock, you've got to know before you sell them how you're going to get back to where you are. We don't want to have to wait 3 years to get back and then find that the market isn't there at the time. So we've got to have that in our mind before we even sell. We need to, as Jason talked this morning about prioritising mobs and managing them accordingly. And if you haven't, like Lifetime Ewe isn't the be-all and end-all of the sheep industry, but it teaches you some really good fundamental skills. So I'd encourage you to get enrolled. And key performance drivers. In my Lifetime Ewe groups, I actually kept a whole set of data right from go to woe, right down to the final gross margin of their monitor flock. And out of each group of half a dozen, there'd be only one or possibly two had kept decent enough records to be able to fulfil all the thing. So generally across the board, I think in agriculture, our record keeping is still very poor. So because if I ask quite a few producers some of the key profit drivers, they actually can't tell me that. And I think you need to know exactly where you are. And you know, when we're looking after our sheep, I drive past properties and I look at bloody emaciated or bloody condition score 1 sheep, and I drove through one road in the Western District a few weeks ago, and I thought there was about 3 RSPCA probabilities up that road. And you know, one of the fundamentals I don't think they understand is we've got to look after them so they'll look after us. So I'd like to think that we look on it. If you've got 3,000 ewes, they're employees of your business and you've got to look after them. And you know, if you treat an employee shithouse, you know what's going to happen. You'll get poor performance or he'll be gone, and that's probably end up being a good thing. So understanding that fundamental formula for ending up with a good gross margin, and if you've got a clear understanding where the key performance, put a figure in beside each of those, we'll find that now, like stocking rate will have a great impact, but it also has a high cost. And when we get seasons going like this, having extra stock on the place creates a lot of stress. So we need to be able to work our way through that and try and identify. And benchmarking might be okay, but I think first and foremost establish where you're at and try and improve that. If you understand another person's system well enough and it can be compared, okay, we can go into some comparative analysis, but make sure you've got those fundamental things. And flowing out from each of them, there's probably half a dozen major considerations that you need to have in mind. So the main thing is this is the bloody engine room of the business. Those operating costs are what drive the whole system. These bloody things down here, I shouldn't call them that, but they're parasite charges. Not the wages so much, but the bloody overheads and that. You know that you're going to be lumbered with those costs. If you sit inside for 12 months drinking coffee, you're still going to have to pay overheads, you're going to have to pay interest, and you'll probably have to pay wages. But it's spending those operating costs more effectively. So if we spend $1 on operating costs, I want to get $3 in return. To have a $2 margin to be able to pay these figures down here, these costs down there. Some of the mistakes that we make is that we let negatives dominate our thinking a little bit. We can, if it hasn't rained, that's the pipe opener, isn't it? With your discussion when you meet another farmer, how much rain did you have? And you haven't had any, so you're starting a conversation on a negative note. So I quite often when I meet people, I don't like small talk. I like to get to the bloody point, and they will actually get a bit threatened by that a little bit, but so be it. So I see a lot of farmers that unfairly beat themselves up mentally when goals are not achieved. Some will then skimp on expenses, and this can compound their problems. That 2 costs before that I talked about, you know the cost of what it might cost to feed you, but you've got to make sure that you know if you don't feed it, what that's going to cost you as well in deaths, poor ewe production, lamb survival, animal health issues. You've got to have some appreciation of that before you decide not to feed. And a lot of the time we'll find it'll move to our approach will go for survival, we'll be putting out spot fires around in our business rather than keeping our eye on the bigger picture. We can become inward, withdraw and from family and the community if the wave is rather big. And I've experienced this in my consulting work where I'm doing a lot of succession and taking on the problems of other people to the point that when I go home I would become totally inward. Now, I feel as though I can speak from a point of view of, you'd say, well, I went through a case where I had a brother who died from motor neurone, and then I had a wife leave, and then I had prostate cancer, and I had depression, I had anxiety. But I've turned all those bloody things into a positive for myself now, and that's what we've got to do in our business. So, speaking from experience, I know what it's like, how it can actually turn you inward. And I reckon, at this time of the year, if you really care about your sheep and the season's going against you, I know you care that much that it starts to impact on the way you operate as an individual. Usual mistakes that men folk make, we usually bury ourselves in the work, and in doing so we enter our cave a lot of the time, and you can become the husband or father that the rest of the family don't like or want to be with. And we never want to go there. And we can develop a distorted perspective, and we can make mountains out of molehills. And that's why I think it's really important you have external input into your farm. Now, I coach and mentor a lot of young farmers and young business people, and I'm trying to keep them balanced in their perspective. They lose sleep and can become irritable and angry. I know a lot of farmers who wake up in the middle of the night and they just cannot get back to bloody sleep. We can write a list before we go to bed. I've just semi-retired in my role, and what that has done for me, it has given me 1 hour's more sleep a night. So I'm now getting one more night's sleep a week, and my life has changed enormously. So I'd encourage you, if you're a poor sleeper, that tells me that there's some real changes needed somewhere along the line. And be prepared to share that with somebody else who can actually help you achieve the change. And I now believe that sleep comes second to oxygen in terms of your future life. We can think much better, make much better decisions if we're there. If sometimes menfolk can start to put short-term solutions on longer-term problems, and lo and behold, they stop rewarding themselves. One of the things we should understand in our life is this stimulus, response, reward triangle. We get a stimulus to do something, we respond to do it, but we must reward ourselves. And most farmers will go and buy a new piece of machinery, and that they see that as their reward. Well, it is, and they usually say, well, I don't care what colour the tractor is as long as it's green. So we've got to make sure that there's little rewards in there. And if that's just a weekend away or at a night at the pub with your agent, the families and that, and celebrate the fact that we did so well with the sale of those lambs and this team put it in. So it's just little rewards that we've got to keep doing it. You can't keep grinding yourself into the ground without some form of reward. So have you really thought about what your priorities really should be in life? You know, your personal physical and mental health is the starting point, in my opinion. The care for your family, their love and their support and responsibility. You know, when the shit hits the fan, your family are what it's all about. And we've got to make sure that they've got a higher priority. And you'll notice the business comes in third, whereas I see a lot of the time the business is number one for a lot of farmers. Number 4 is your personal priorities. It's making sure that you're actually achieving something outside the farm, and make sure at the end of the day you've got some friends. You know, it's a pretty sad life if you get to retirement and you've got nobody to talk to. And make sure that you're actually sharing your load within the community, because we all know the numbers in our community have gone down, so therefore we've got to make sure that we're contributing, otherwise our living on that farm won't be all that flash if we haven't got a community around it. And then there's the other priorities. I'll just let you scan those. Some of the attributes of crackerjacks in agriculture, I think they exhibit all those. They'd probably go through them unconsciously, identify the weaker ones, and then they would be working their butt off to make sure that they're lifting their game. I need to keep. Talk to me later if you want. I'll send you the presentation in the mail if you want to. Strategies to cope. All the time improving physical and mental health, I think. And I found that I was leaving home by 7 o'clock and getting home at about 7. And I'm being a single guy, I'd go to the pub, I'd have a beer, a meal, a wine, and go home. But it was going there. So this year, having more time on my hands, having an ability to do more physical exercise, it really helps it up here. So a lot of the time you think you're out there working hard, but if you're in a ute or a tractor and that, you're just not getting the fitness you need. But having that acute awareness of how you change as a person as you get under pressure, and I imagine your wife or your husband would be the greatest barometer of knowing that when you enter the room, she would almost be able to predict what had actually happened in the paddock. So gain another assessments. Keep aligning yourself with positive people. It is just so bloody exciting to be with positive people. And I have this little rule that if I get caught with a gutsache in a pub, I try and lose them within 3 minutes. Because I just can't afford, I just don't want to be around them. I've had to be mindful of people that are under duress and might be highly stressed, and I'll certainly look after them. But if Blake's just making a sport out of being a negative person, just lose them. You've just got to. Maintain dialogue with those. Look, there's a lot of really successful people that you might look up to and say, oh shit, he wouldn't want to know me, or he wouldn't share anything. I've always found that those people are more than willing to share, and if you're a young person on the move, You know, I just love being with those sort of people. And remember, a problem shared is a problem halved, I reckon. Strategies in type, keep those achievable goals up there and maintain the big D. You look between the top operators and the bottom, but the discipline in the business in the top operators is really high. In the bottom thing, they'll always find excuses for not achieving. Review expenditure decisions you made in the good times. When you get to the bad times, look back at that decision and say to yourself, was that a good decision? Is it really paying dividends? Because the whole heart starts to run a bit when we've got a few dollars in the bank, and we've got decisions start to be made down here instead of up here. So it's really important that we review our decisions in reverse. So it's the decisions you make in the good times that get you through the bad. Coping strategies, continue to be sceptical of your own beliefs. If you're not sceptical of your own beliefs, you're not going to trigger new learning. I would say in this room, whatever you do currently, there is a better way. And there might be a huge difference, but for a lot it may be great. Make sure you're always dealing with the hard, cold facts. If it's poor, it's poor. It's not so-so. So make sure the head's making the decisions, not the heart. And I talked before, your ability to bounce off a tight time, I think, is really important. Planning and preparation, that's what sets it all up. Maintain your priorities and your discipline. Reward yourself in different ways. If you don't have breakfast with your kids, make sure you have the evening meal together. Because I see a lot of farms where they're spending so much time on the farm and not hardly any on the family, and they pay a dear price. And make sure your banker's always on the same page as what you are. And this idea of having 3 bloody budgets, one for the banker, one for you and one for somebody else, you know, you end up, there's only one fool you can fool in your life, and that's yourself. So one budget, clear hard facts with the banker and your big form a team. And expected bad news is much better than unexpected bad news. And always remain true to your core values, your trust, honesty, integrity. Because when we get under a lot of pressure and the dollars are not there, what ends up happening, you're using your trade creditors as your bank, and you're stretching your time out and you're not talking to them, and in the end you think you've got through a position, but you've burned up a lot of your petrol tickets with some people along the way. All right, I just want to, perception's everything. You know, if we looked at a position on a farm, we'll have a sun here, everything on the right looking down this way is seeing things on the right black, on the left white. This person standing, this is the other brother. All he can see, this situation's totally white. What are you bloody talking about? It's just white. This one down here, black on the left, white on the right, black over here. But you're in the right position because you're actually in the helicopter position. So if you're having a lot of interpersonal problems, you've got to have that ability to shift, to see, rather than try and turn everybody around to your way of thinking. So it's really important. This slide here, we'll stop at this one. This is the most simplest slide I've ever produced, but I reckon it means the most. This is a typical farmer. This is his whole life around here. This is his rest of his life in here. This is his farming life out there. The 2 most important things you've got in farming are out of your control, is weather and prices. So when the seasons or the prices go bad, your self-worth goes out the window. And what I would like to think that for a lot of farmers, you build the rest of your life to become a bigger part here. The whole thing might become a bigger part. And do you ever think that your partner or your husband or the farming member, the doer out in the paddock, that their farm means too much to them? So we've got to have the ability to see outside the square. That's where a lot of our solutions are. And the last thing is, that's my balanced life. 168 hours in a week, 3 lots of 56, 56 of work, 56 of sleep, and 56 please yourself. Now that other 56 down here in the community family, that's important. But if you're spending a hell of a lot more time in bed here, you're out in the community there, where's the number of hours for your family? So make sure that you've got some sort of balance there. So it's the time, the work you put into your time is more than the time that you put into your work. So we'll open up for questions.
How hard is it to get the man, the farmer, to line up with maybe the wishes of the wife and the rest of the family?
Yeah. It's how do you actually get the male partner to line up with the needs or wants of the rest of the family? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. That's where men have got to show a little bit more courage to change. We've got this. I can say it because I still believe I'm a man. We've got to make sure that that's where this addiction that farmers have to being farmers, and they have. Holmes and Sackett have done the research, and they go to farms and actually do all the measurements. They get all the weeks, 3 weeks shearing, a week crutching, so much lamb, so add them all together, and the last 20 or 30%, we can't find what's happening. So what happens is you see that's a paid employee down that side with the weeks and the number of holidays, public sick leave. You get about that many weeks of productive weeks. At the standard 38-hour week, that becomes one labour unit. If you've got 45,000 with 15,000 of non-cash, like a house, meat, electricity stuff, that into that gives you $36 an hour. Now, if we looked at a farmer just putting in 56 hours a week, he doesn't take as many holidays, but he actually ends up with, if we put $40 an hour on all of the hours, there's no way we could pay the farmer that amount of dollars, because he'd be doing a lot of $20 an hour stuff, and it's not feasible. So we've got to become more efficient at what we're doing. I reckon you've got to have $500,000 per family unit to make it work. If you've got no debt and you live a pretty meagre life, obviously that figure can come down. But I reckon men have got to have the courage to acknowledge the needs of the rest of their family and got to change. We're just so blinkered, and we've just got, we only are thinking about ourselves. I know we have a great responsibility to generate the income and the livelihood for the family out in the paddock, but you've got to have the courage to change. You just can't keep going and ignoring it. The greatest learner is if your partner leaves, just ask yourself whether you can still farm on half the assets.